Still pushing papers at some desk job, Sarah. Jessica's voice carried across the reception table deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. The champagne sloshed in her glass as she gestured dismissively toward me. Everyone laughed. I was the family joke. The spinster older sister, 36 and alone. I smiled, keeping my expression neutral. Actually, Jessica, I fly helicopters. Combat rescue. She rolled her eyes drunk on champagne and attention. Oh, right. What's your tough girl call sign then? Steel Phoenix. The room continued chattering, but her groom Nathan, a Navy SEAL I'd never met, went completely still. His face drained of color as he stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. Then he stood up, walked across the reception hall, and did something that made the entire room freeze. He saluted me, his posture perfect, his eyes locked on mine with respect. Ma'am, he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. It's an honor. I returned his salute automatically. When our hands dropped, he remained standing before me. Helmand Province, 2017. I nodded once. You were there. My brother Michael was. Second squad pinned down in the riverbed. You flew in when every other pilot refused. 6 men came home that day because of you. Across the room, Jessica's face had transformed from mocking amusement to something ugly and raw. Her perfect day had been hijacked. The spotlight had shifted, and for once in our lives, it wasn't shining on her. I was 12 when I learned where I stood in our family. I'd placed my report card in front of my father at the kitchen table. 6 subjects, 6 A's. Dad glanced at it for 3 seconds, nodded once and said, "That's what we expect from you, Sarah," then returned to his newspaper. 2 days later, Jessica came home with her report card, a B+ in math surrounded by C's. Mom squealed with delight. "Jessica, you brought your math grade up. Oh, sweetheart, we're so proud of you." That weekend, we had Jessica's favorite meal to celebrate. I sat at that table pushing food around my plate and understood something fundamental about my place in this family. Jessica was celebrated for trying. I was only noticed when I failed. The pattern repeated in countless ways. When Jessica made cheerleading after 3 attempts, my parents threw a party. When I won the regional science fair, Dad asked if the prize money would help pay for Jessica's cheer uniform. I became the responsible one, the one who could be counted on to manage herself while everyone else managed Jessica. I became Jessica's caretaker without anyone asking if I wanted the job. Our parents fought constantly, and I was the one who comforted Jessica, who made breakfast when Mom couldn't get out of bed, who restored order to the chaos. By 18, I was exhausted from being invisible, from holding everyone together while no one held me. I decided to join the Army to go to flight school, to build a life where my value wasn't measured by how well I served everyone else's needs. The night I told my parents, Dad's face turned red. "The military, you want to abandon this family to go play soldier. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard." Mom started crying immediately. "How could you do this to us, Sarah? We need you here. Jessica needs you." Jessica, 14 and more interested in her phone than the conversation, looked up just long enough to ask, "Does this mean you won't be at my graduation?" I left for basic training 2 months later. Dad didn't say goodbye. That was the day my father stopped calling me his daughter. The dinner service had finished when Jessica stood up, wobbling slightly from champagne. She started with the usual wedding speech gratitude, making everyone feel included in her happiness. People dabbed at their eyes. Mom cried. Dad beamed with pride. Then her gaze found me in the back corner, and something shifted in her expression that needed to establish hierarchy to remind everyone of their place in her world. "And of course," she continued, her voice taking on a teasing lilt, "I have to thank my big sister Sarah for being here. Everyone, my sister is a desk warrior for the military. She pushes papers somewhere safe while the real heroes do the fighting." She raised her glass in a mock toast. The laughter hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush as guests chuckled and nodded, as if Jessica had said something charming rather than cruel. I could have stayed silent, could have shrunk back into my corner as expected. But something in me refused to be erased this time. "I fly helicopters, Jessica. Combat rescue missions." The laughter died in awkward patches. Conversations faltered as guests realized Jessica hadn't been joking about something funny. She'd been mocking something real. But Jessica, drunk on attention, couldn't read the shift. She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Sure, Sarah, whatever you say." She waved her hand dismissively and turned back to the crowd with a bright smile. Someone at a nearby table asked loud enough for others to hear, "Wait, you're Army Aviation, what's your call sign?" I hesitated. Call signs weren't something you advertised to civilians, but I was tired of being invisible, tired of letting Jessica rewrite who I was to make herself feel bigger. Steel Phoenix. The words rippled through the crowd, and I saw the exact moment they reached those who understood what they meant. An older man wearing a Marine Corps veteran's cap went completely still, then stood up and began to clap slow measured claps, each one distinct and weighted with meaning. A woman with a Navy veteran's pin joined him. Then a younger man with military bearing rose from his seat. Within 30 seconds, a dozen people were standing and applauding, the energy shifting from celebration of a bride to recognition of something far bigger. Jessica's face went from glowing to confused to irritated. She was still standing at the head table, microphone in hand, and suddenly no one was looking at her anymore. They were looking at me. Then Nathan moved. Every eye turned to him as he stepped down from the head table and began walking toward me. Without a word, without even glancing at Jessica, he stopped in front of my table and rendered a formal military salute. "Thank you for your service, ma'am," he said. His voice carried to every corner of that silent room, raw and genuine. My body responded before my mind caught up. I snapped to attention and returned his salute with the same precision and respect. For a moment, we stood there, two veterans acknowledging each other in the language we'd both learned in service to something bigger than ourselves. Then the room exploded in applause. People surged to their feet, some wiping their eyes. Phone cameras appeared, recording this moment that had somehow become more memorable than any planned wedding tradition. Nathan stepped closer, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Helmand Province, August 2017. You saved 6 men that day, including my brother Michael. He died 3 months later in another op, but he lived long enough to tell me about the voice on the radio who promised she'd bring them home and did. He called you Steel Phoenix." I looked past Nathan to the head table where Jessica stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. This was her wedding, her carefully orchestrated day where she was supposed to be the center of every story people would tell afterward. But the applause wasn't for her. The moment everyone would remember from Jessica's wedding wasn't the first kiss or the first dance. It was this, her groom saluting her sister. I left the reception shortly after slipping out while guests were still processing what they'd witnessed. I drove home in silence, windows down, letting the night air clear my head. By the time I pulled into my parking spot, I'd almost convinced myself that the evening would fade into family history. I was wrong. I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Every link led to the same thing: video footage of last night. Someone had recorded Nathan's salute, and that someone had posted it online. Within hours, it had spread across military communities and family circles. There were comments from strangers who felt they knew everything about our family dynamic from a 2-minute clip. This is what real respect looks like. The bride's face, though, followed by a laughing emoji. Imagine mocking a war hero at your own wedding. By afternoon, local news outlets had picked up the story. Local hero honored at sister's wedding after bride's mock. Navy SEALs touching tribute to Army pilot who saved his brother. Someone had dug into my military records. Articles detailed my service, my deployment history, the commendations I'd received. My call sign was becoming public knowledge. I declined every interview request and tried to return to my quiet civilian life, to my job flying medical transports. But the attention was suffocating. Reporters camped outside my building. Former soldiers reached out sharing stories about missions we'd flown together. My work email flooded with messages from strangers. The attention felt like the opposite of the invisibility I'd lived with my whole life, but it wasn't better. I hadn't asked for this. I just wanted to attend my sister's wedding, sit quietly in the back, and leave without causing trouble. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk, not about the wedding, about Afghanistan, about what you did 8 years ago. You probably don't remember, but I do. Meet me." It was signed Nathan. My heart raced. What could he possibly need to tell me that was so urgent? I responded with a single word: "Where?" He suggested a cafe 40 miles outside the city. I drove there the next morning, hands tight on the steering wheel. The cafe was small and quiet, tucked into a strip mall. Nathan was already there, sitting with his back to the wall. "I'm sorry about what happened at the reception," he began. "I didn't mean to hijack Jessica's wedding, but when you said your call sign, something inside me just snapped. I couldn't let her mock you like that. Not you. You said this was about Afghanistan. He nodded slowly. Do you remember a mission in Helmand Province, August 2017? A SEAL team ambushed extraction under heavy fire. Everything inside me went still. I remembered. You don't forget missions like that, the ones where you know you're probably going to die, but you go anyway because 6 men are counting on you. The Taliban had the high ground firing from 3 positions, and the SEAL team was pinned down with nowhere to go. Every other helicopter had been grounded due to the intensity of the fire. I'd been the ranking pilot on duty. I'd made the call to go in. I pulled out 6 men, I said quietly. Barely made it out alive. My helicopter took 17 bullets. One of them passed 6 inches from my head. Nathan leaned forward. My younger brother Michael was one of those 6 men. He survived because of you, because you flew in when no one else would. He made it home, got to see our parents again, got to have 3 more months of life. He paused. He was killed 3 months later, an IED. He died instantly. Nathan pulled out a small notebook and opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. This is what he wrote about that day. I looked down at the neat handwriting. August 15th, 2017. Thought I was going to die today. We were pinned down, taking fire from everywhere. Then this voice came over the comms. Female call sign, Steel Phoenix. She said she was coming to get us. Her voice was so calm, like she was ordering coffee instead of flying into a kill zone. She told us to be ready, that she had us, that we were going home. And she did it. She brought us home. If I ever meet her, I need to thank her. She gave me another chance at life. My vision blurred. I hadn't known their names, hadn't known what happened to them after I dropped them at the field hospital. They were just 6 soldiers I'd managed to save. But to Michael, I'd been the difference between dying in that riverbed and getting to live 3 more months. For 8 years, I've been trying to find Steel Phoenix, Nathan said. I wanted to fulfill Michael's wish to thank you, but that call sign was buried in classified reports. And then at my wedding, you said it. The woman who saved my brother was sitting in the back of the room, my wife's sister. Why did you marry Jessica if you knew about her sister? His face darkened. I didn't know. I met Jessica 2 years ago. She never talked about you. The only time your name came up, she complained that her sister was cold, that she never came home for holidays. I had no idea who you really were until that night, until you said those 2 words. We sat in silence, absorbing the impossible tangle we'd found ourselves in. Then Nathan's phone buzzed. It's Jessica. She's been calling all morning. He hesitated, then showed me the screen. 12 missed calls, 20 text messages, each more frantic than the last. What he didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until later, was that Jessica had driven to this cafe after tracking his location. She'd been sitting in her car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, watching through the window as her husband showed me her brother-in-law's journal. She'd seen his tears. She'd seen the way he looked at me with gratitude and respect she'd never earned from him. Jessica was still watching, still seething, still plotting how to destroy the sister who'd stolen her spotlight once again. 2 weeks after our meeting at the cafe, the tabloid article appeared. Steel Phoenix's dark secret military pilot involved in fatal training accident. The article claimed I'd been responsible for a helicopter crash during a training exercise 7 years ago, an incident that killed a crew member. It painted me as reckless, glory-seeking someone who'd endangered lives in pursuit of reputation. The story included excerpts from my service records carefully edited to remove context, making my decisions look negligent. The truth was more complicated. There had been a training accident. A young specialist named Torres had died when our helicopter experienced catastrophic mechanical failure during a routine exercise. The investigation had lasted 4 months with every decision scrutinized. In the end, I'd been fully exonerated. The failure was traced to a maintenance error. I'd actually managed to prevent additional casualties by bringing the damaged aircraft down in a controlled crash. But none of that nuance appeared in the article, just the inflammatory headline and edited records that made me look incompetent. The source was listed as an anonymous family member, but I knew exactly who it was. Those service records were stored in boxes in my parents' attic documents I'd left behind when I moved out. Only Jessica would have had both access to those records and motivation to weaponize them. Only Jessica would know exactly which incident to distort, which moment from my past could be twisted into something damaging enough to destroy the reputation she resented so deeply. My employer called that afternoon. "Sarah, we're placing you on administrative leave pending our own review. I know you were cleared by the Army, but with the current media attention, we need to do our due diligence. I was grounded effective immediately. Former colleagues who'd reached out after the wedding video now avoided my calls. A training seminar uninvited me, citing unforeseen scheduling conflicts. I drove to my parents' house that evening, rage and desperation warring inside me. I needed them to admit what Jessica had done to stand up for me the way they'd never managed to before. Mom answered the door, looking defensive before I'd even said a word. I asked her directly if Jessica had taken those records, if she'd leaked them to the press. Mom's face tightened. I don't know what Jessica did or didn't do, Sarah. She's been very upset since the wedding. This wedding attention hurt her deeply. Can't you just let it go? The words hit me like a slap. My career was being destroyed, and my mother was asking me to let it go because Jessica's feelings were hurt. Dad stood behind her, silent as always, offering nothing. I realized I would never get what I needed from them. They would always choose Jessica's comfort over my justice. I was about to leave when I heard my mother say something strange. Your father tried to make it right, before he got sick. He tried, but she found it. What do you mean? What did Dad try to make right? Mom's eyes widened as if she hadn't realized she'd spoken aloud. Then her gaze shifted, becoming vague. Nothing. I'm just tired. But there was something in her expression that made me wonder if there was more to this story than I knew. The next morning, my phone rang. Ms. Reynolds, this is William Harrison. I'm an attorney who worked with your father. I think it might be time for us to have a conversation about your father's final wishes. Final wishes? My father's been dead for 5 years. I think you might find there's more to the story than you know. Could you come to my office tomorrow? It's a matter of some delicacy. I agreed, curiosity overriding caution. Harrison's office was in an old brick building downtown. He greeted me with a firm handshake and led me to a conference room where a manila folder sat on a polished table. Sarah, I knew your father for over 30 years. Robert was a good man, but he wasn't always equitable in how he treated his daughters. I think he recognized that toward the end of his life. Harrison opened the folder and withdrew a document. 3 weeks before your father's death, he came to me with this, a new will he wanted to execute quite different from the document that was filed with the probate court. It was a handwritten will leaving the family home to me, along with a substantial life insurance policy and my father's personal savings. To Jessica, he left a modest sum far less than what I was to receive. At the bottom was a note in my father's handwriting. My daughter Sarah has sacrificed for this family her entire life. She has given without asking for recognition or reward. While I cannot make up for all the times I failed to see her value, I can ensure that she is properly provided for now. Jessica has always received more than her fair share. It is time to correct that imbalance. The will was completely different from the one executed after his death, the one that had left everything to my mother and Jessica with only a small bequest to me. What happened to this document? I asked. Your father left this with me for safekeeping. He died before signing the final version. 3 days after his death, Jessica came to my office. She had another will, the one that was ultimately filed, and claimed it was your father's most recent document. She lied, I said. Harrison nodded. The document she brought had your father's signature, but I had concerns. It seemed odd that he would create a new will without consulting me, but I had no proof of fraud. He pulled another document from the folder, a photocopy of an insurance policy for $2 million with me listed as the sole beneficiary. Your father took out this policy 10 years ago. The beneficiary was always you, Sarah. But when he died, the insurance company received a change of beneficiary form shifting the payout to your mother and sister. The form had your father's signature, but with inconsistencies that troubled me. I stared at the insurance document at my name listed as the beneficiary of a policy I'd never known existed. $2 million that should have come to me. $2 million that had instead gone to my mother and Jessica. Why are you telling me this now? Because I made a mistake, Sarah. I should have investigated more thoroughly. When I saw that video from the wedding, when I read about the leaked service records, I recognized a pattern. Jessica has always taken what was yours. Harrison pushed the folder toward me. These are copies of everything I have. You'll also find the name of a forensic handwriting expert. I can't promise you'll recover what was taken from you legally. Too much time has passed, but at least you'll know the truth. I left with the folder clutched to my chest, feeling like I was carrying a bomb. Inside was proof that my father had tried to acknowledge me to balance the scales between his daughters. And Jessica had destroyed that last attempt, just as she'd tried to destroy my reputation with the leaked service records. I spent the night poring over the documents Harrison had given me, examining every detail of the handwritten will and insurance policy. My father's intentions were clear. He had wanted to right the lifelong imbalance between his daughters, to finally acknowledge the sacrifices I'd made. And Jessica had stolen that from me, just as she'd stolen everything else. The next morning, I called the forensic handwriting expert Harrison had recommended, Dr. Eleanor Winters. She agreed to examine the documents immediately. "Forgery cases fascinate me," she said over the phone, her voice brisk and professional. "Especially when they involve family members. There's usually a distinctive pattern. People who forge signatures of those close to them tend to mimic certain characteristics while missing subtle details." I drove to her office that afternoon, the original documents secured in a folder. Dr. Winters was a small woman with silver-rimmed glasses and meticulous movements. She examined the contested beneficiary form through a magnifying glass, comparing it to samples of my father's authentic signature from the handwritten will and other documents. After an hour of careful analysis, she looked up at me over her glasses. "This is a forgery," she stated with absolute certainty. "A skilled one, but definitely not your father's signature. Notice the pressure points here and here." She pointed to specific areas with a pencil. "Your father pressed harder at the beginning of his strokes. The forger pressed harder at the end. It's a subconscious pattern almost impossible to fake." "Can you put that in writing?" I asked. "Something official I could use legally." "Already drafting my report," she replied, turning to her computer. "I'll have it for you tomorrow. But Sarah," she removed her glasses, "you should know that forgery cases, especially involving wills and insurance policies, are extremely difficult to pursue after so much time has passed. The burden of proof will be substantial." I nodded, already aware of the challenge ahead. "I know, but I need the truth documented even if I never use it in court." With the handwriting expert's preliminary confirmation, I felt a surge of both vindication and anger. I had proof now, real, tangible evidence that Jessica had not only deliberately humiliated me and tried to destroy my reputation, but had actually committed fraud, stealing money that should have been mine. The question now was what to do with this information. I decided to consult a lawyer who specialized in estate fraud. Patricia Chen had a reputation for taking on difficult cases, especially those involving family disputes. Her office was modern and sleek, a sharp contrast to Harrison's traditional space. "Let me be frank," Chen said after reviewing the documents and Dr. Winters' preliminary report. "You have a strong case for fraud. The evidence suggests your sister forged your father's signature on the beneficiary change form and presented a falsified will. But the statute of limitations is a significant hurdle. It's been 5 years. Normally, you'd have only 2 years to contest a will after probate." She tapped her pen against her desk thoughtfully. "However, there are exceptions for fraud that wasn't discoverable through reasonable diligence. You were deployed when your father died, and you had no reason to suspect anything until now. That might give us an opening." "What about the leaked service records?" I asked. "That's a more recent offense." Chen nodded. "That's actually easier to address. If we can prove Jessica took those records without permission and deliberately misrepresented their contents to damage your reputation, that's a clear case of defamation with actual malice. The timing works in our favor there." I took a deep breath. "So what do you recommend?" "We have 2 options," Chen said, leaning forward. "We can pursue this aggressively, file a civil lawsuit against Jessica for both the forged documents and the defamation, potentially even push for criminal charges on the forgery. That would be a public, messy battle." She paused, studying my face. "Or we can approach this strategically. Use what we know to negotiate a settlement that accomplishes your goals without the public spectacle. What matters most to you here, Sarah, punishment, justice, or recovery?" The question caught me off guard. What did I want part of me? The part still raw from decades of being overlooked, from Jessica's public mockery, from having my career threatened, wanted punishment. I wanted Jessica to face consequences, real ones, for once in her life. But another part of me, the part that had learned discipline and perspective through military service, recognized that a protracted legal battle would damage everyone involved, including me. "I want the truth acknowledged," I said finally. "I want what my father intended me to have, and I want Jessica to understand what she did." Chen nodded. "Then I suggest we start with a demand letter. We lay out what we know, what we can prove, and what we're prepared to do if she doesn't cooperate. We offer a settlement that returns the contested assets to you, and requires her to publicly retract the false allegations about your military record. She won't agree to that, I said, thinking of Jessica's lifelong pattern of avoiding consequences. She'll deny everything. Perhaps, Chen replied, a slight smile playing at her lips. But people tend to become remarkably cooperative when faced with irrefutable evidence of felony fraud, especially people with something to lose. As I left Chen's office, my phone rang. It was Nathan. Sarah, we need to talk, he said, his voice tense. Something's happening with Jessica. She's been making calls, acting secretive. I think she's planning something else against you. My grip tightened on the phone. I know about the will, Nathan. I know what she did. There was a long silence on the other end. What will, he asked finally. My father left me the house and a $2 million insurance policy. Jessica forged documents to steal it all after he died. The words came out cold and flat, stripped of emotion. Another lengthy pause. I didn't know, Nathan said slowly. But it explains why she's been so frantic these past few days. My parents called this morning. They're flying in tomorrow. Jessica told them you're threatening to sue her. I haven't threatened anything yet, I replied. But I will. I have proof now. She's trying to get ahead of it, Nathan said. She told my parents you've been unstable since the military, that you're inventing conspiracy theories because you're jealous of her marriage. They want to help her fight whatever's coming. I laughed, a short, harsh sound. Of course they do. Everyone always wants to protect Jessica. Not everyone, Nathan said quietly. I need to see this evidence, Sarah. I need to know exactly what happened. We agreed to meet at my apartment that evening. I spent the intervening hours making copies of all the documents, organizing them chronologically, preparing to show Nathan the truth about the woman he had married. When he arrived, I laid everything out on my kitchen table: the handwritten will, the insurance policy, the forensic handwriting report, even the service records Jessica had leaked to the press with the authentic investigation conclusions that had cleared me of any wrongdoing. Nathan went through each document methodically, his military training evident in his careful, deliberate examination. He asked clarifying questions, took notes, and occasionally looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When he finished, he sat back in his chair, rubbing his hand across his face. She did this, he said. It wasn't a question. She stole your inheritance, forged your father's signature, and then tried to destroy your reputation when she felt threatened. Yes, I said simply. Nathan stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. His shoulders were tense, his posture rigid. I married someone I don't know, he said finally. Or maybe I just didn't want to see who she really was. He turned back to me. My parents are wealthy. They've always protected Jessica, just like yours did. They'll hire expensive attorneys, try to bury this in legal motions and procedural delays. I know, I replied. But I have the truth on my side. The truth isn't always enough in court, Nathan said grimly. But I might be able to help. I have access to Jessica's computer, her phone. There might be evidence, their emails about the service records, searches about forgery conversations with your mother. I hesitated. I don't want to put you in that position, Nathan. This is between Jessica and me. No, he said firmly. It's about right and wrong. It's about honoring my brother's memory by doing the right thing, even when it's hard. He met my gaze directly. Michael would have wanted me to help you. You gave him 3 more months of life. I can give you the truth. After Nathan left, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of Jessica's betrayal, wondering how things had spiraled so far. What had started with a moment of recognition at a wedding had uncovered years of deception and fraud. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. We need to talk, just the 2 of us. No lawyers, no Nathan. I stared at the message, suspicion immediately flaring. What game was she playing now? Another text followed. Please, Sarah, I know you're angry, but there's more to this story than you know. Meet me at Dad's grave tomorrow at 10. Just hear me out. Dad's grave. It was a calculated choice on Jessica's part, a location loaded with emotional significance, a place where I might be more vulnerable, more willing to listen. It was exactly the kind of manipulation she'd perfected over the years. And yet part of me wanted to go, needed to go. Perhaps it was time for a final confrontation, for Jessica to look me in the eye and explain why she'd done what she'd done, why she'd taken so much from me. I texted back one word, fine. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about my father, about the will he'd written in his final weeks, about his belated recognition of everything I'd sacrificed. I thought about Jessica growing up in his shadow, always praised, always protected, never having to earn anything. And I wondered if, had our positions been reversed, I might have become someone like her. Someone who took without thinking, who expected the world to bend to accommodate her needs. No, I decided, we made our choices. Jessica had chosen greed and deception. I had chosen service and sacrifice. We were who we had decided to become. The cemetery was quiet in the morning light, dew still clinging to the grass, as I walked the familiar path to my father's grave. I'd visited only a handful of times since the funeral, my complicated relationship with him making grief a tangled, uncomfortable process. Jessica was already there, standing by the headstone. She wore dark sunglasses despite the overcast day, her normally perfect appearance slightly disheveled. She didn't look up as I approached. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly when I stopped beside her. I didn't respond. I'd said everything I needed to say to Jessica at her wedding. Now it was her turn to talk. She removed her sunglasses, revealing reddened eyes. "I know what you found out. About Dad's will, the insurance policy." And I kept my voice neutral, waiting. Jessica looked down at our father's grave. "I didn't forge Dad's signature." I laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "The handwriting expert says otherwise." "I didn't say there wasn't forgery," Jessica replied, her voice tight. "I said I didn't do it. Mom did." The statement hit me like a physical blow. "Mom," Jessica nodded. "She found Dad's draft will in his study. She showed it to me hysterical, saying he was going to give everything away to you, that after all she'd sacrificed being married to him, she'd be left with nothing." She paused. I told her to tear it up, to forget about it, but she had a different idea. "She forged the beneficiary form," I said slowly, the pieces clicking into place. "Yes, and she had a friend type up a new will. She practiced Dad's signature for days." Jessica swallowed. "I knew it was happening. I didn't stop it. But I didn't do it myself." I studied my sister's face, looking for signs of deception. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Mom's not well, Sarah. You must have noticed when you confronted her. The doctors say it's early-stage dementia. She gets confused, emotional. Sometimes she says things—" Jessica trailed off. "Things like what?" "She talks about Dad a lot, about his betrayal with the will, about how she fixed it." Jessica looked up at me, her expression pained. "She started telling people, Sarah. Her bridge club, her doctor, anyone who will listen. It's only a matter of time before she tells the wrong person." I absorbed this information slowly. It explained my mother's strange behavior, her cryptic comments about Dad trying to make it right. "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said finally. "You knew about the forgery and said nothing. You spent money that should have been mine, and you leaked my service records to the press." Jessica's face flushed. "I panicked after the wedding. Everyone was talking about you, praising you. Nathan couldn't stop looking at you with that admiration. I felt like I was disappearing, like everything I'd built was collapsing." Her voice cracked. "I know it was wrong. I know I can't fix it. But I'm trying to protect Mom now. She's not mentally capable of handling legal proceedings, Sarah. So what do you want from me?" "Time," Jessica said. "A few months to get Mom into a care facility where she'll be properly looked after. And then we can work out a settlement. I'll pay back whatever you want. I'll publicly apologize for the service records. I'll do whatever it takes." I studied my sister, trying to see past the performance to the truth. Jessica had always been skilled at appearing sincere, at saying what people wanted to hear. But there was something different in her demeanor now, a resignation, an acceptance of defeat that I'd never seen before. "I need to verify Mom's condition," I said finally. "And I'll need more than promises, Jessica. I want a formal agreement drawn up by my attorney." "Anything," she agreed quickly. "Nathan's parents are arriving today. They want to meet with you." "Why would I meet with them?" "Because they control the money," Jessica said bluntly. "My trust fund, the house down payment, it all came from them, not from Dad's insurance. If you want financial restitution, they need to be involved." I hesitated, suspicion flaring again. "This feels like a trap." "It's not," Jessica insisted. "They're traditional conservative people who value family reputation above everything. When Nathan told them about the forgery, about what I did with your service records, they were—" She winced. Let's just say they're not happy with me. They want to handle the situation before it becomes public. It's already public, I pointed out. My reputation was already damaged by your leak. But not the forgery, Jessica countered. Not yet. They want to contain this, make it go away quietly. I considered my options. Meeting with Nathan's parents could be risky. They might try to pressure me to bully me into accepting less than I deserved. But it could also be an opportunity to resolve this without a protracted legal battle, to get what my father had intended me to have without dragging his name and memory through a public scandal. I'll meet with them, I decided, but my lawyer comes too. Jessica nodded, relief visible on her face. Thank you. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Jessica, why did you do it? Not just the service records, but everything. Why has it always been a competition with you? She stopped her back, still to me. For a moment I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then without turning around, she said, Because you were the strong one, the smart one, the one Dad respected. Her voice was barely audible. I was just decorative. Useful for being pretty, for being cheerful, for not causing problems. You had his respect. All I ever had was conditional love based on how well I performed being Jessica. She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing by our father's grave, pondering her words. For the first time, I considered that perhaps Jessica's lifelong pattern of taking from me wasn't just about greed or entitlement. Perhaps it had been about trying to claim the one thing she thought I had, that she didn't our father's genuine respect. It didn't excuse what she'd done. Nothing could. But it helped me understand the why of it all, the driving force behind decades of jealousy and sabotage. I called Patricia Chen as I walked back to my car, briefing her on Jessica's revelations and the upcoming meeting with Nathan's parents. She agreed to accompany me, though she warned me to be cautious. Wealthy families like to make problems disappear, she said. They'll try to buy your silence with less than you deserve. Remember, we have leverage here, not just civil claims, but potential criminal charges for the forgery. Don't let them intimidate you. The meeting was set for that afternoon at an upscale hotel downtown. I arrived with Chen 15 minutes early, giving us time to prepare our strategy. We agreed on our minimum acceptable terms, full restitution of the insurance money, plus interest legal fees covered, and a public retraction of the false allegations about my military record. Nathan's parents, Robert and Eleanor Wilson, arrived precisely on time. They were exactly as I'd imagined them, him tall and distinguished with military short silver hair, her elegant and composed in expensive understated clothing. They carried themselves with the confidence of people accustomed to controlling every situation they entered. Nathan accompanied them, his expression carefully neutral as he made the introductions. Jessica was notably absent. Ms. Reynolds, Robert Wilson began once we were seated in a private conference room. I want to start by expressing my sincere regret for this situation. My son has shared with us the details of your military service, including your rescue of his brother Michael. Our family owes you a debt that can never be repaid. I nodded, acknowledging his words, but not softening my stance. I appreciate that, Mr. Wilson, but we're here to discuss a different matter. Indeed. He cleared his throat. I understand there are concerns regarding your father's will and an insurance policy, as well as some unfortunate publicity regarding your military record. Not concerns, Chen interjected smoothly. Documented evidence of forgery, fraud, and defamation. Ms. Reynolds has proof that her inheritance was stolen through criminal means and that her sister deliberately damaged her professional reputation with false allegations. Eleanor Wilson's perfectly composed expression flickered briefly. We're not here to dispute the facts, Ms. Chen. We're here to find a resolution that serves everyone's interests. My client's interest is justice, Chen replied, and compensation for what was taken from her. Robert Wilson nodded. Of course. We're prepared to make financial restitution for the full amount of the insurance policy with appropriate interest. We can also ensure that Jessica issues a public retraction and apology for the mischaracterization of Ms. Reynolds' military record. I looked at him skeptically. Just like that, no conditions, no demands for silence. One condition, Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm. This remains a private family matter. No criminal charges, no public lawsuit. Jessica is still our daughter-in-law, and Nathan... She glanced at her son, who remained impassive. Nathan deserves to handle his marriage without the spectacle of legal proceedings against his wife. Chen looked at me, letting me make the call. I considered the offer. It was essentially everything we'd planned to demand: the money, the retraction, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing. But it came with the implicit understanding that Jessica would face no real consequences, that she would once again be protected by those around her. Yet pursuing criminal charges would mean a lengthy public battle that would expose not just Jessica, but also my mother, whose deteriorating mental state made her both culpable and vulnerable. It would mean dragging my father's name and legacy through a humiliating public scandal. It would mean subjecting myself to more scrutiny, more exposure, more time spent dwelling in the past rather than building a future. "I want one more thing," I said finally. "A trust fund established for my mother's care, enough to ensure she has proper medical attention for the rest of her life, regardless of what happens between Jessica and Nathan." Robert Wilson raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised that my additional demand was for my mother rather than myself. "That can be arranged." "Then we have a deal," I said, extending my hand. "My attorney will draw up the agreement." As we worked through the details, I caught Nathan watching me, a question in his eyes. Later, as we were preparing to leave, he pulled me aside. "Why did you agree?" he asked quietly. "You could have pursued charges, made Jessica face real consequences." I considered his question carefully. Because this was never about punishing Jessica. It was about getting what my father wanted me to have, about having the truth acknowledged. I paused. And because sometimes moving forward is more important than looking back. Nathan nodded slowly. "What happens now between you and Jessica?" I thought about my sister, about the complex tangle of love, resentment, and shared history between us. "I don't know," I admitted. "Some damage can't be undone, but maybe with time and truth we can build something different, something honest." As I walked out of the hotel into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Not the full burden, some of that would always remain, but enough to stand straighter, to breathe deeper. I had the truth now. I had acknowledgement. I had what my father had intended for me. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Jessica would still be protected, still shielded from the worst consequences of her actions. My mother's role in the deception would remain a private family matter rather than a matter for the courts. And the relationship between Jessica and me would never be what it might have been in some other kinder universe. But it was enough. Enough to close this chapter and begin writing a new one on my own terms, free from the shadows of the past. Or so I thought, until my phone rang that evening with news that would change everything once again. "Sarah, it's Nathan. Jessica's gone." His voice was tense, controlled in that way military people manage crisis emotion, firmly contained focus on the facts. "What do you mean, gone?" "She took her passport, her jewelry, emptied her personal bank account. Left a note saying she needs time to think. Her phone's off. Her credit cards haven't been used." He paused. "She left right after the meeting with my parents. I think she's running from the agreement." I closed my eyes, not surprised, but still disappointed. Of course she is. Jessica never faces consequences if she can avoid them. "My parents are furious," Nathan continued. "They were willing to protect her, to pay for her mistakes, but this disappearing, potentially embarrassing the family, this crosses a line for them." "What does this mean for our agreement?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "It's complicated. They still want to resolve this quietly, but they're now more concerned about protecting the family name than protecting Jessica." His voice lowered. "They want to meet again. Tomorrow morning. They're prepared to offer a different arrangement." The new meeting had a completely different atmosphere. Robert Wilson's cordial diplomacy was replaced with cold efficiency. Eleanor's composed elegance had hardened into something more severe. They were no longer negotiating to protect their daughter-in-law. They were conducting damage control. "Ms. Reynolds," Robert began without preamble, "Jessica's actions have changed our perspective on this situation. We still wish to avoid public litigation, but our priority now is resolving this matter conclusively." "What are you proposing?" Chen asked, her pen poised over her legal pad. "Full restitution of the insurance policy with interest as previously discussed. The trust for your mother's care also as agreed. A public statement acknowledging the false nature of the allegations regarding your military record." He paused. "And we're prepared to provide additional compensation for the emotional distress and professional damage you've suffered." I raised an eyebrow. "That's generous. What's the catch, Film?" Eleanor leaned forward. "In return, we require a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Nothing about Jessica's actions, the forgery, or Nathan's involvement becomes public. Ever." Her gaze was steel. And you agree to cooperate with whatever narrative we establish regarding Jessica's absence. Which would be what exactly? I asked. A private health matter, Robert supplied smoothly. Mental health issues requiring specialized treatment abroad. A story that preserves dignity while explaining her disappearance. I looked at Nathan, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. His face was carefully blank, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the subtle tells of someone holding himself rigidly under control. And what about your marriage? I asked him directly. He met my gaze squarely. There won't be one after this. My parents have already engaged a divorce attorney. We're filing on grounds of abandonment. I nodded slowly, processing this development. Jessica had run as she always did when cornered, but this time her escape had cost her the protection of her powerful in-laws. She'd played her final card and lost. I need to consider this offer, I said, looking at Chen, who nodded agreement. Take the day, Robert said, standing to indicate the meeting was over. But we'll need an answer by tomorrow. This situation requires timely resolution. Outside, Chen and I discussed the new terms. It's more than we originally hoped for, she admitted. The additional compensation is significant, but the NDA is restrictive, and cooperating with their narrative means effectively lying about what happened. I weighed the options. The Wilsons were offering a complete financial victory plus additional damages. My career could be salvaged, my reputation restored. My mother would be cared for. The truth would be acknowledged, if not publicly proclaimed. But something about it still felt unsatisfying, another round of burying the truth to protect someone who didn't deserve protection. What if there's another way? I said suddenly. Chen looked at me curiously. What do you mean? A way to accept their financial offer, but still have the truth acknowledged without technically violating an NDA? I explained my idea. Chen listened, her expression moving from skepticism to grudging admiration. It's creative, she conceded, and legally sound if carefully executed, but the Wilsons might not agree. Let's find out, I said. The next morning we presented my counterproposal. I would accept their financial terms and sign the NDA. I would cooperate with their narrative about Jessica's health treatment. But I wanted one addition. I would establish a foundation for female veterans transitioning to civilian life, funded partially by the settlement money. The foundation would be named for my father, with a mission statement, acknowledging his belief in balancing scales and recognizing invisible sacrifice. It wasn't a direct statement about what Jessica had done, but it was a public acknowledgement of the values my father had tried to uphold at the end of his life. It was truth encoded rather than buried. The Wilsons exchanged glances, obviously weighing the implications. Finally, Robert nodded. Acceptable, with one condition. The foundation includes scholarship opportunities for young women interested in military medical careers, in memory of those who didn't come home, including Michael Wilson. Nathan looked up sharply at his father's words, surprise and something like gratitude crossing his face. Agreed, I said immediately. We signed the papers that afternoon. The Reynolds Wilson Foundation for Veteran Support would be established within 6 months, with initial funding from the settlement and ongoing contributions from the Wilson family. My father's legacy would live on, not in the form he'd originally intended, but in a way that honored his belated recognition of sacrifice and service. As for Jessica, she remained gone. Rumors circulated about a private treatment facility in Switzerland carefully planted by the Wilson family public relations team. Nathan filed for divorce, and the proceedings moved forward without Jessica's participation. My mother, now settled in a high-quality memory care facility, talked constantly about Jessica finding herself overseas, a narrative she seemed to genuinely believe. And I began rebuilding. With the retraction of the allegations about the training accident, my administrative leave was lifted. I returned to flying medical transports, finding meaning in the work that had always defined me more clearly than family ever had. One evening, 3 months after the settlement, Nathan called to invite me to dinner. Not a date, he clarified quickly. Just a conversation between two people who've been through something complicated together. I accepted, curious about where his life was heading now that Jessica was gone. We met at a quiet restaurant outside the city, far from the gossip circles that had followed the drama of Jessica's health crisis and the expedited divorce. The foundation launches next month, Nathan said after we'd ordered. My father's unexpectedly passionate about it. I think it helps him feel connected to Michael, knowing his name will be associated with helping others. I nodded. Your parents surprised me in the end. They're tough negotiators, but they understand the importance of legacy. They understand the importance of control, Nathan corrected with a wry smile. But in this case, it aligned with doing the right thing. He hesitated. I've been thinking about rejoining active duty. Not combat roles, I've had enough of that. But there are programs where veterans help other veterans transition to civilian life. Seems like the right fit after everything. It does, I agreed. You'd be good at that. We talked for hours, carefully navigating around the subject of Jessica, focusing instead on shared experiences in the military, on plans for the Foundation, on the slow process of rebuilding lives that had been disrupted by secrets and lies. As we were preparing to leave, Nathan asked the question I'd been expecting all evening. Have you heard from her? I shook my head. No, I don't expect to. I haven't either, he said. But she'll come back eventually. Jessica always lands on her feet. I considered this. Probably, but not to the same world she left. Not to the same people willing to catch her when she falls. Nathan nodded, understanding the implication. We had both changed, hardened perhaps, but also clarified in our understanding of what we would and wouldn't accept from others. As I drove home that night, I thought about Jessica, somewhere in the world, perhaps planning her eventual return, her next reinvention. I thought about my mother slowly losing her memories, including the guilty ones. I thought about my father, who had tried too late to right the wrongs of a lifetime. And I thought about myself, no longer the invisible daughter, no longer defined by what I'd sacrificed for others, but now standing firmly in my own truth, building a life and a legacy that honored not just what I'd lost, but what I'd found in the process of reclaiming it. The foundation would launch next month. My name would be on it alongside my father's, and Michael Wilson's, a testament to sacrifice, recognized, to balance, restored to truth, acknowledged, even if encoded rather than proclaimed. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was, I decided, enough to build a future on. 6 months after the settlement, the Reynolds Wilson Foundation for Veteran Support opened its doors in a renovated warehouse downtown. The industrial chic space housed offices, meeting rooms, and an open community area where female veterans could gather for support groups, skills workshops, and networking events. The logo, a stylized phoenix rising, was my subtle nod to the call sign that had connected all these disparate lives. Below it, our mission statement read, Honoring invisible sacrifice, balancing scales of support, rebuilding lives of service. Words carefully chosen to convey truth without violating the NDA I'd signed. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I stood between Robert and Eleanor Wilson, all of us smiling for the cameras in an appearance of perfect harmony. Nathan was there too, in his naval dress uniform, standing tall and solemn beside a framed photograph of his brother Michael. The Reynolds Wilson Foundation represents our commitment to those who serve, I told the gathered reporters. We recognize that the transition to civilian life can be challenging, especially for women veterans whose sacrifices often go unacknowledged. Eleanor Wilson nodded beside me, adding her carefully scripted line, Our family believes in honoring those who protect us and in providing second chances for those who need healing and support. The reporters didn't know that her words referred not just to veterans, but to her absent daughter-in-law, supposedly recovering in a Swiss clinic. They didn't know that the foundation existed because of fraud, forgery, and a family's desperate attempt to control the narrative. They just saw a heartwarming story about supporting veterans exactly as we'd intended. After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled during the reception, Nathan approached me with 2 glasses of champagne. To invisible sacrifices made visible, he said, offering me one. I took it with a small smile. To truth, even when encoded. We clinked glasses, standing slightly apart from the crowd watching the Wilson's charm reporters and potential donors. Have you decided about the Air National Guard position? Nathan asked. I nodded. I start next month. Weekend duties, some training deployments, but I'll still have time to run the Foundation's flight program. The program, which would train female veterans to become medical evacuation pilots, had been my passion project within the Foundation's broader mission. They're lucky to have you, Nathan said. Both the Guard and the Foundation. Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. You're leaving, aren't you? For that Pentagon position. He sighed. Orders came through yesterday. I report to Washington next week. He hesitated. I wanted to tell you in person. I felt an unexpected pang at the news. Over the past months, Nathan had become Not exactly a friend, but a comrade in arms. Someone who understood what I'd been through because he'd walked through it beside me. His departure would leave a gap I hadn't anticipated. "Washington's not that far," I said, aiming for casual. "And the Foundation has a board meeting every quarter. You'll need to fly back for those." "I will," he promised. Then more hesitantly, "And maybe other weekends, too, if there's a reason." Our eyes met, and in that moment I recognized the potential simmering between us, the possibility that had been carefully contained while we navigated the complicated aftermath of Jessica's deception. With Nathan moving to Washington with the divorce finalized with the Foundation established, some of those complications were falling away. Before I could respond, Robert Wilson approached, ending the moment. "Sarah, there's someone I'd like you to meet. Claire Donovan from the Veterans Affairs Office. She's interested in potentially partnering with the Foundation." I nodded, setting down my champagne. "Of course." As I followed Robert, I glanced back at Nathan. He raised his glass slightly, a promise in his eyes. We'd continue this conversation later. There was time now, time to explore possibilities without the weight of the past pressing down quite so heavily. The Foundation's first year exceeded all expectations. We helped over 200 female veterans transition to civilian careers, provided housing assistance to dozens more, and launched the flight training program with an inaugural class of 10 women, all with experience in military aviation, all seeking new purpose in civilian medical transport. I split my time between the Foundation, my Air National Guard duties, and occasional civilian flights. The rhythm of my days was demanding but fulfilling, each role connecting to the others in ways that made me feel whole and purposeful. Nathan visited from Washington once a month officially for Foundation business, but increasingly for personal reasons as well. We moved cautiously, both aware of the complicated history that connected us, but drawn together by mutual respect and understanding that deepened with each visit. Then, 13 months after the Foundation's launch, Hurricane Maria formed in the Atlantic. A Category 4 monster, it gathered strength with terrifying speed, taking forecasters by surprise as it changed direction and headed for the Carolina coast. I was at the Foundation when the call came. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, my former commanding officer from Afghanistan, now coordinating civilian emergency response for the National Guard. "Reynolds, we're activating the Civilian Rescue Pilot Network. Every qualified pilot with search and rescue experience is being called in. This is going to be bad." I didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." Within hours, I was at the command center being briefed alongside other civilian pilots who'd been called up for emergency response. The situation was dire. Evacuations had started too late, floodwaters were rising faster than predicted, and thousands of people were trapped in areas already inaccessible by ground. "We'll be coordinating with Coast Guard and National Guard units," Martinez told us, pointing to areas on the map. "Priority evacuations are hospitals, nursing homes, and stranded families with medical emergencies. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. This is high-risk flying, people. No shame in declining a mission if you assess it's beyond your capabilities." I studied the map, already mentally plotting routes and calculating fuel requirements. This was what I'd trained for, what I'd done in combat zones under even worse conditions. I could make a difference here. As we prepared to deploy, my phone rang. It was Diane, the Foundation's office manager. "Sarah, I just got a call from a shelter in Brunswick County. They're flooding and need emergency evacuation. I wouldn't bother you, but it's Jessica. She's there." My hand froze on the zipper of my flight suit. "Jessica's back. Since when?" "I don't know," Diane said. "The caller said she's been volunteering at the shelter for a few weeks. They're on the second floor now with 6 children whose parents got separated in the evacuation. The water's coming in faster than predicted, and official rescue is prioritizing hospitals." My mind raced. Jessica back in the country without telling anyone. Jessica volunteering at a shelter instead of living the privileged life she'd always cultivated. Jessica now trapped with children depending on her. "Text me the exact coordinates," I said. "I'll relay it to command." I found Martinez at the operations table. "Sir, I have intel on a shelter in Brunswick with children trapped on the second floor, requesting permission to divert for evacuation." He glanced at the coordinates I showed him. "That's not on our primary list, Reynolds. It's in the path of the worst wind shear. Too risky with current conditions." "I can do it," I said firmly. "I've flown worse in Helmand." Martinez studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "Take Stevens as your co-pilot. He's got mountain rescue experience good with stressed civilians. But Sarah... He gripped my arm. If conditions deteriorate beyond parameters, you abort. That's an order. We're not losing pilots today. Understood, sir. As I headed toward my assigned helicopter, I sent a quick text to Nathan. Jessica's back, trapped in hurricane shelter with kids. I'm going to get her. His reply came seconds later. My SEAL team is deploying for water rescue, sending coordinates to their commander. We'll back you up on the ground. Be safe. The takeoff was rough wind already picking up as the hurricane's outer bands reached land. Stevens, my co-pilot, gripped his armrest, his face pale despite his experience. The sky had turned an ominous greenish-gray, and rain lashed against the windscreen in violent bursts. Conditions are deteriorating faster than forecast, Stevens said, checking the weather radar. Wind shear increasing at lower altitudes. We've got a window, I replied, focusing on maintaining our heading as the helicopter bucked in the gusting winds. We get in, load the evacuees, and get out before the worst hits. As we approached Brunswick County, visibility dropped dramatically. Rain hammered the windscreen, and wind gusts threatened to push us off course with each passing minute. I flew by instruments more than sight, relying on years of training and experience to keep us stable in conditions that would have grounded most civilian pilots. There, Stevens pointed to a building emerging from the swirling gray. That's the shelter. I could see immediately that the situation was worse than reported. The building, a former elementary school, was already partially submerged. Water had reached the second-floor windows on one side, and the roof where evacuees would need to board was being battered by wind and debris. Command, this is Phoenix 1, I radioed Mand. Shelter is compromised, requesting water rescue backup for extraction. We'll attempt rooftop evacuation if structure remains stable. Roger, Phoenix 1. Navy SEAL Unit Echo is en route to your coordinates. ETA 8 minutes. 8 minutes. I studied the roof, calculating risks. The wind was gusting to 60 knots, well beyond safe hovering parameters. The roof itself was flat but small, leaving minimal margin for error. And if the building's structural integrity was compromised by flooding, the rooftop could collapse under the helicopter's downwash. But on that roof stood 7 figures, 6 small ones clustered around a taller one I instantly recognized as Jessica. Even from this height, through rain-streaked windows, I knew my sister's stance, the way she held herself. She was sheltering the children, using her body to block the worst of the wind and rain from the smallest ones. We're going in, I decided. Prepare for rooftop extraction. Stevens looked at me like I was insane, but began the pre-landing checklist without argument. As we descended toward the roof, the full force of the wind hit us, buffeting the helicopter violently. Maintaining a stable hover in these conditions was like trying to balance on a knife edge during an earthquake. 50 feet above roof, Stevens called out, wind shear increasing. I fought the controls, making constant micro-adjustments as the helicopter pitched and yawed. Through the windscreen, I could see Jessica looking up, shielding her eyes against the rain, recognition dawning on her face as she realized who was piloting the helicopter. 20 feet debris warning 3 o'clock. I glimpsed it in my peripheral vision, a piece of roof torn loose from a nearby building hurtling toward us like a missile. I banked sharply, narrowly avoiding collision, then fought to restabilize our hover. Command, this is Echo Team, a new voice crackled over the radio. We have visual on Phoenix 1, approaching shelter from south side, standing by for rooftop assistance. Through the rain, I could make out 2 inflatable boats approaching the building Navy SEALs at the controls, fighting the current to maintain position below the roofline. Echo Team Phoenix 1, will hover for extraction. Your team transfers evacuees from roof to helicopter. Children first. Roger, Phoenix 1, beginning ascent to roof now. I watched as the SEALs deployed climbing equipment, scaling the side of the building with practiced efficiency despite the wind and rain. They reached the roof immediately, organizing the evacuees, preparing the children for transfer. Jessica stood back, helping the SEALs secure harnesses around the children, but clearly ensuring she would be the last evacuated. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see her crouched at eye level with the smallest child speaking calmly, probably explaining what would happen next. It was a side of Jessica I'd never seen before, composed in crisis, putting others before herself. For a moment, I wondered if the hurricane had somehow transported me to an alternate universe where my sister was a different person entirely. The evacuation proceeded with agonizing slowness. Each transfer was a battle against wind and physics, requiring precise coordination between the SEALs on the roof and Stevens guiding them into the helicopter. One by one, the children were brought aboard, wet and terrified but safe. Finally, only Jessica remained on the roof with 2 SEALs. As they prepared to secure her harness, a violent gust hit the helicopter, forcing me to compensate with a sharp adjustment that sent us drifting momentarily away from the roof. At that same moment, I heard the engine make a sound no pilot ever wants to hear, a high-pitched whine followed by a mechanical grinding. Warning lights flashed red across the instrument panel. "Engine failure!" Stevens shouted. "We're losing power." I had seconds to make a decision. With 6 children already on board, we couldn't risk a rooftop landing that might collapse the structure. We needed to get clear of the building and find somewhere to put down before the engine failed completely. "Echo Team, we have mechanical failure," I radioed. "Evacuate remaining personnel by water. We're diverting for emergency landing." I saw Jessica's face as we pulled away, saw her nod once in understanding. Even in this moment of crisis across the distance, something passed between us. An acknowledgement, a recognition. Through the driving rain, I spotted our only option, a parking garage about half a mile away, its top level just above the floodwaters. It would be a hard landing, but with what little power we had left, it was our best chance. "Command, this is Phoenix 1. Emergency landing at coordinates 34.21, 7816. Parking structure. Engine failure imminent." I guided the faltering helicopter toward the garage, watching the power levels drop with each passing second. We were going to make it, but just barely. "Brace for impact," I told Stevens and the children. "This is going to be rough." The touchdown was hard, the helicopter skidding across the wet concrete of the garage roof metals, screaming against stone. The main rotor caught the side of a ventilation structure, sending fragments flying, but the passenger compartment remained intact. We were down damaged, but safe. Stevens immediately began checking the children for injuries, while I made the Mayday call, giving our exact position and condition. Then I turned my attention to what was happening back at the shelter. Through the rain-streaked windscreen, I could just make out the school building in the distance. The roof where Jessica had been standing was now completely submerged water, having risen another 6 feet in the few minutes since we'd left. If we'd delayed the evacuation, if we'd waited even 15 more minutes, everyone would have been lost. My radio crackled. "Phoenix 1, this is Echo Team. We have the remaining evacuees. Repeat, we have them. En route to Extraction Point Alpha." Relief flooded through me. Jessica was safe. The children were safe. Despite engine failure, despite hurricane conditions, despite everything, we'd done it. As I sat in the grounded helicopter waiting for rescue teams to reach our position, I found myself thinking about the strange symmetry of it all. 8 years ago, I'd flown into hell to save Nathan's brother, never knowing how that single act would ripple through all our lives. Today, I'd flown into another kind of hell to save my own sister, the same sister who had tried to destroy me. Life had a way of bringing things full circle, of creating opportunities for redemption and reconciliation in the most unexpected circumstances. As the wind howled around our damaged helicopter and 6 rescued children huddled together under emergency blankets, I wondered what this new circle would mean for Jessica and me. Perhaps like the phoenix in our foundation's logo, something new could rise from the ashes of our burned past. Not the same relationship we'd had before that was gone forever, but something different. Something based on truth rather than competition, on mutual respect rather than jealousy. It wouldn't be easy. It might not even be possible. But as rescue vehicles finally approached through the floodwaters, I found myself open to the possibility in a way I hadn't been before. Sometimes it takes flying through a hurricane to find clear skies on the other side.